Hey everybody, it's Christine at Zeman Development. Today we're going to walk through the contact activity type in the EveryAction data source. So you can see on my screen I do have a date range between April 1st and June 6th. I am working with my contact type and I am opting to bring over all of my non-core fields. I am going to ignore my custom fields for today. You will need to select your fields as is fitting for your import. So once you've clicked that select, you're going to click submit, and that's going to take a minute to process. So we'll click submit like I just did, and that's going to bring us to the download screen. And this is going to take some time as it's connecting with EveryAction and loading in all of those fields. Once that's loaded, then you're going to go ahead and you will see the Importacular template screen. So we can see here, I do have my screen available. I can see my data source is my EveryAction data source, and I do have 18 records for review. Now, I can either work with an existing template, these are my options here, or I could build a new one by clicking on the green circle with the plus sign. I am going to work with an existing template. I want to walk you through some of the options that I have available there. Now, as I mentioned in other videos for EveryAction, I do recommend that you name your templates so you know what activity type you were using when you created it, because each of the different activity types has some different fields. And there's a lot of technical information behind this, but opening a template without all of the same field names can cause some issues with your template, and it can result in things not being mapped, and it can result in templates not remaining the way you need them to remain. So I do recommend that you keep your templates separate by activity type. Now, if you want to have multiple for a type, that is completely fine. Just make sure you keep them separate by type. So all that said, we're going to click on contacts so we can work with my existing template, and we're going to click on the pencil so we can open that template. Now, a couple things I do want to mention. I am showing some functionality today that is an add-on to the base package available with EveryAction, so I will indicate that when we get to that point. But the majority of what I'm showing is available for all users. So we're going to go ahead and start here on the Contacts tab. And the first thing that I do want to draw your attention to is this constituent mapping, add new mapping button, and it is grayed out, and that is because we have already used it. But when you open your template for the first time, this is always the first thing that you're going to do. And that is what created this constituent mapping right here. So that is how we start our constituent. That's how we start every template. So we're going to go ahead and start by looking at that mapping. So to open the mapping, I'm going to double click. Now, once we open this, these fields should look familiar to you as fields that you see in the Razor's Edge on Bio 1 and Bio 2. So things like the first name, things like this ID, which is your constituent ID. If we scroll down, you can see I have a last name. If you're in some countries, you'll also see a surname, so that would be under S for that instead. We have addressee and salutation, things that you can see initially. We've got suffix and title, different fields like that. So what you can see here is that I have mapped these using a combination of my source fields, which are the fields coming directly out of EveryAction, and my default values, just a standard that I'm setting across the board in order to populate the Razor's Edge. So what you're going to see happen is we're going to have a Razor's Edge record that has these fields filled out using the values in EveryAction if I've selected a source field, or the value in the default column. The other thing I want to draw your attention to are the settings on the side. So for example, for my primary addressee, I have a setting that I've chosen that's only going to update my addressee on a new constituent record. I assume that what I have in Razor's Edge is much more reliable than my default value I've chosen. So I don't want to change existing records to have the default value. I just want that for new records. So you can see I've made some choices like that along the way for things like the name, as well as that addressee and salutation that you saw just a second ago. So lots of options there with those settings, ways that you can make that change. The other thing I want to point you to with the name is I have chosen proper case so that I can remove the casing issues that you find from people typing in online forums. I don't want to see all caps and I don't want to see all lowercase. I like a nice proper case in my Razor's Edge. So Lots of options you can do with those field settings like that. Once you have gone through and filled in your constituent record, then the rest of these buttons will be unlocked, and you can do things like making your constituent codes. So you can see I have set a default value. I want to assign the constituent code of friend to everyone in this file. Now you would pick whatever constituent code works for you, and then you can decide what you need to do as far as if it should be assigned to just new constituents or if it should be assigned to new and existing. So lots of options for that. The other thing that I have already set up here is an alias mapping for the van ID. I do have documentation on this in our knowledge base as well, but we strongly recommend that you use your van ID in Salsa Engage in the Razor's Edge as follows. We recommend that you create a van ID alias type. You can see mine here. You can name yours however you need to. You can name it EveryAction, whatever works for you, but something that you know is the van ID. And then I have the key name mapped as the van ID. So that source field coming out of EveryAction tells me my van ID. Default value here is telling me the name of that field. Once you have this set up, I'm going to go ahead and show you my area settings because this is also important. You do need to check the box for the alias value here. We don't want you to just match on the alias type because on the chance that you have a duplicate record in EveryAction, we don't want you to overwrite Razor's Edge. So I do recommend that you use this match setting and that you change this to do not add new alias when existing match found. So that means that both the alias type and the alias value or the key name have to match in order to count as a match. But if it's a match, nothing's going to happen in the Razor's Edge. The other thing I recommend that you do with that van ID is come over to your settings and check this box. Mine's grayed out because I've already checked it, so that we can add a field in the mappings to use it for an alias search. And what that does is that gives us this field up at the top that says alias search lookup only. That means I can use that van ID in my criteria sets and I can match records directly. So once you put those van IDs in the Razor's Edge, that makes it much easier to match records and get the same record every time. So definitely recommend you look into that information. So if there's anything else here that you want to add, you can always do that. So let's say we want to add a constituent attribute. So we just go ahead and name this field. So I'm just going to call it constituent attribute. And then we need to define what it becomes in Razor's Edge. So the category is the name of the attribute. So I could possibly have something that would tell me from my source, but most likely it's going to be a default value. I can select my attributes. So I'm going to work with my community involvement. And then I could say maybe I want to add my congressional district to that. Maybe I want to add something else further down. So maybe I need to add my state house, or maybe I want to add any of these other fields. It's really fine, whatever you need to do. Oops, probably not the home opt-in status. Let's go ahead and let's just add our congressional district. And that's going to create an attribute that allows me to track that information. So I can add my date created if I want to add that date, and then go ahead and save and close. So that's how easy it is to add a mapping to your template. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of our other mappings so you can see what we have. On the address tab, you can see that I have added an address. So this includes information from our template telling us our street address. So we've selected that, as well as our city. We have added the country and the county where we know it. I used the last updated on to add the date from. If I wanted to add an address info source, such as EveryAction, I can do that there. I can say whether or not I want these addresses to be preferred. I do, so I have checked that box as a default value. I have my state set up here and my zipper postal code as well. Next, you can see an email address. So you can see I have set this up to add the email address from EveryAction as a phone number. I have a default value for the type, and then I'm using that do not email as a way to check that box for the do not contact. So if they didn't say do not email, we're leaving it blank. If they did say do not email, we're going to check that and mark it as do not contact. So I've got a lot of different pieces set up there. The other thing that I have opted to do with this, and this is available if you want to add employers, I have used the organization relationships tab to add their employer. So I've used the date from. I'm going to go ahead and check that box for is employee, and is primary, because I want to mark this as their primary business. And then if you scroll down, you can see I have put the employer as the org name, and I've used the occupation field for their position. I have set up a reciprocal and a relationship. And I've also gone ahead and on my address tab, I've added that work address and I've linked it to the employer. So you can see instead of just linking that to the constituent, I have that linked to the employer. So that way I have an address linked to that business when I do the import. So lots of different fields here, lots of different things you can do. Of course, you can add, maybe you have an attribute that tells you more about their relationship to the Congressional House or to the State House, Senate House. So wherever you want that information to go, you can map that with these tabs and work with that information. So if a tab is locked that you'd like to use, please let our team know. We'll be happy to help. But that's how you can set up this mapping. So we're going to go ahead and save and close. And I'm going to walk you to the review screen. So we're going to go ahead and use my control report here. I definitely recommend you use a new control report every time if you're importing real data. I'm just using a standby one for the purpose of a demonstration. So you can see in our review screen, we can review everything that we've mapped. We can also see if records have matched Razor's Edge or not. So John Smith has matched Razor's Edge. We can see that match record down here. We can open that by clicking on the orange RE if we want. But Lloyd here did not match anything in Razor's Edge, so he is set as a create record. So that's going to create a new record in Razor's Edge. Update is going to update an existing record in the Razor's Edge. If we click through our tabs, we can actually see everything that we have mapped here, and we can review it before it goes in. You can see our addresses, we can see our work addresses, doesn't look like we have much information there. We can see those email addresses as well as any cell phone numbers. And finally, we can see where we do have information here for those businesses. So if you wanted to add those relationships, you can do that, and this is where you can review that as well. So once you've reviewed everything, you can validate and import. We won't be covering that in this video, but we do have other tutorials to help with that. I hope that you found this helpful and that this explains a lot of the options that you have available in the contacts activity type in EveryAction. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great